When we think about the anatomy of a massive disappointment, we tend to focus almost all our attention on the event itself.
Right, the actual circumstance.
Exactly. We obsess over the phone call telling you that the assured slam dunk job promotion, well, it actually went to somewhere else. Or we replay that moment of sitting in a clinical office staring at a medical report that just completely contradicts months of desperate hope.
Yeah, or agonizingly dissecting a conversation where a really fragile healing relationship simply shattered.
Right. We view these things as external circumstances crashing down on us, like, an assault from the outside.
You do. We look at the shattered pieces of our expectations and assume the tragedy is simply that the blueprint didn't work out. I mean, the timeline we built for our lives has been violated, and we treat the event as an isolated breakdown in the system.
But if you look closer, underneath that immediate shock, there is usually this very quiet, very heavy undercurrent.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just grief over the circumstance. It's a subtle, almost involuntary accusation directed upward. The human heart immediately begins to whisper, why didn't you fix this? Why did you let this happen?
And ultimately, that evolves into the most foundational question: are you truly who you say you are?
Yeah.
That accusation, it's a universal reflex. It operates on the premise that human nature fundamentally hasn't changed. The temptation to put God on trial when things go sideways is as old as Scripture itself.
Wow, yeah.
And it is as immediate as an unanswered prayer you might have prayed this very morning.
Yeah.
We don't just wrestle with our difficult circumstances, We wrestle with the God who authorized them.
Because we want relief.
We want relief, certainly.
Yeah.
But beneath the desire for relief is the raw desire for control.
Mm.
We instinctively resist the possibility that a divine plan might actually involve our discomfort.
Okay, let's unpack this, because addressing this landscape of brooded expectations is the exact mission for our deep dive today.
It's such a heavy but necessary topic.
It really is. We are immersing ourselves in a fascinating narrative study by Lee Carl. It's titled Sovereign Rest and the Force of Faith. Sovereign Rest and the Call of Matthew 11.
It's a really incredible piece of writing.
It is. And what this text does is it grabs that specific human moment, the crash of our expectations, and puts it under a microscope. It takes us straight into the 11th chapter of Matthew, not as a soothing passage, but honestly as a confrontation.
A confrontation is the perfect word for it.
Right. It is a divine recalibration that forces a shift from desperately trying to manage outcomes to finding something the author calls sovereign rest.
And it is a radical shift in perspective. What's so compelling is that the text doesn't deal with this in abstract theological terms.
No, it doesn't at all.
It anchors this entire recalibration in a very specific, recognizable human crisis.
Yeah.
It begins with John the Baptist.
The forerunner.
Yeah.
The man who dedicated his entire existence to pointing others toward the Messiah. But in this specific narrative moment, he is sitting in a prison cell. He is facing the collapse of his anticipated ministry and, well, his life.
Yeah, everything he built towards is just gone.
Right. And from that cell, he sends his disciples to Jesus with a question that echoes every time we hit a wall. He asks, "Art thou he that should come, or do we look for another?"
Think about the sheer psychological weight of that inquiry. I mean, his entire identity was built on recognizing Christ.
His whole purpose.
Right. Yet, under the crushing pressure of unmet expectations, specifically the expectation that the Messiah would bring immediate political and physical liberation, he falters. He asks if he misread the entire situation.
Let me try an analogy here to map this onto a modern professional experience for you, the listener.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine being a highly dedicated project manager. You did everything by the book. You sacrificed your nights, your weekends, your health to build the foundation exactly as the CEO requested.
Yeah, you're fully invested.
Fully invested, but then the project starts failing, the walls are caving in, you look up at the executive suite, expecting the CEO to intervene, to deploy resources, to save the project and save you, but the CEO just watches.
Oh, that captures the friction perfectly. In that scenario, the project manager isn't just upset about the project.
No, they're angry at the boss.
Right. They are questioning the competence and the character of the leadership. They wonder if the person in charge actually knows what they are doing. And what's fascinating here is how Christ responds to that faltering leadership crisis in John.
Yeah, because you might expect a swift rebuke, right? You might expect a lecture on loyalty after everything John had witnessed.
But he doesn't rebuke the question at all.
Not even a little bit.
He redirects the metric of success. Christ responds to this crisis not with a philosophical argument, but with tangible evidence of a completely different kind of kingdom.
Yes, the miracles.
He tells John's disciples, "Go and show John again those things which ye do hear and see." He points to the blind seeing, the lame walking, the deaf hearing. He is systematically redirecting John's internal struggle away from his own imprisonment and toward the broader, undeniable reality of divine work.
And then he follows up that list of evidence with a very specific, loaded statement. He says, "And blessed is he whosoever shall not be offended in me." Offended.
That word is key. The author's commentary draws heavily on the word offended to explain our modern spiritual condition. It reveals the mechanism of how expectations cloud our spiritual sight.
It's like a blind spot.
Exactly. Even when the divine is working mightily in the macro sense, our hearts falter under the micro pressure of our own circumstances. We take offense when the methods or the timing don't match our personal preferences.
We treat unmet expectations as a personal insult from the universe.
We really do. The study actually pulls from the Matthew Henry commentary to explain this tension, noting that, where true faith exists, there's often a lingering mixture of unbelief.
Right, they coexist.
Yeah. Temptations and trials act as a distortion field. They warp our perception of the evidence we previously trusted. The challenge presented in the text is to refuse to be offended by methods we lack the capacity to understand.
Which means the narrative suggests that disappointment isn't necessarily a failure of faith.
No, not at all.
It's a test of whether our faith is in God's character or merely in our own anticipated outcomes.
That's a profound distinction.
And that sets up a crucial transition in the study. Because John's doubt, serious as it was, stemmed from a genuine crisis, right?
Yeah.
He was facing execution in a dungeon.
It was life or death.
Literally. But what happens when human resistance to the divine plan isn't born from suffering, but from, stubbornness?
Oh, yeah.
The text moves from John's crisis of expectation to the surrounding culture's paralysis of preference.
And Christ pivots to critique the generation around him, using this incredibly vivid sociological metaphor from the marketplace.
The children playing.
Yes. He compares them to children refusing to participate in any game being played. He says, "We have piped unto you, and ye have not danced. We have mourned unto you, and ye have not lamented."
It sounds like a spiritual Goldilocks scenario, doesn't it?
That's a great way to put it.
Because John the Baptist lived a life of strict austerity, fasting, mourning, and the culture dismissed him as too harsh. Then Christ arrives with compassion, eating and drinking with people, and they condemn him for being too loose.
Nothing was ever just right.
Exactly. Now, I have to push back a little on the author's framing here, or at least play devil's advocate.
Sure, go ahead.
Is the text suggesting that our personal preferences regarding how things should be done are actually just a polite disguise for unbelief?
That is exactly the core psychological mechanism the author is exposing. Unbelief rarely announces itself as blatant rebellion against the divine.
Right. We don't usually say, "I'm rebelling."
No, it is much more sophisticated than that. It masks itself as hyper-criticism of the messenger, or the style, or the timing. I mean, if we can find a flaw in the delivery, we excuse ourselves from responding to the message.
Because if you dance when the flute is played, or lament when the dirge is sung, you are surrendering the role of director. You are actively participating in someone else's script.
Precisely. The author's commentary makes it clear that when a human heart is fundamentally unwilling to surrender control, no method will satisfy it. The core issue is the posture of the receiver, not the style of the messenger.
Wow.
God is not directed by human preference, and our hypercriticism is often just a smokescreen for our refusal to submit our autonomy.
That brings up a massive, sobering escalation in the text. Because if John represents a crisis of faith under pressure, and the children in the marketplace represent this stubborn preference, what are the consequences when that stubbornness hardens into a permanent state?
Yeah, that's where things get intense.
What happens when you are presented with undeniable proof and you simply shrug?
Well, then we enter the territory of divine accountability. The text transitions from the rejection of the messengers to a stark, chilling rebuke of the cities of Chorazin and Bethsaida.
These are the woe unto thee verses.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the geographical and historical context here is vital. I mean, these were not pagan cities completely ignorant of Christ. They were ground zero for his public ministry.
Right, they saw it all.
They witnessed undeniable earth-bending miracles firsthand. The blinds were healed in their streets. The multitudes were fed on their hillsides. And yet, the text records that they repented not.
Which is crazy to think about.
Their daily lives, Their core values, their posture toward God, remain completely unchanged by the supernatural.
That psychological phenomenon is just baffling to me. How does an entire community witness something that breaks the laws of physics and just carry on with their day?
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It implies a terrifying kind of apathy. It's one thing to be blind because you are sitting in a pitch-black room. It is an entirely different mechanism to have a floodlight aimed directly into your eyes and actively convince yourself that you don't see anything.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the danger of familiarizing ourselves with the divine without actually submitting to it. The psychological mechanism at play here is cognitive dissonance.
Right.
Acknowledging a miracle demands a massive shift in worldview. If the divine is real and active in your street, you owe it your allegiance. Apathy, in this case, isn't a lack of energy. It is an active defense mechanism designed to preserve the status quo.
So by remaining indifferent, they protect their autonomy?
Exactly. And bringing in the Matthew Henry and author commentaries, the theological principle is unyielding. Greater light brings greater accountability.
To whom much is given.
Much is required, exactly. The cities are condemned more harshly than ancient, famously wicked cities precisely because they had more evidence. Revelation, when it is willfully rejected or apathetically ignored, doesn't just remain neutral information.
It transforms into condemnation.
Yes, because opportunity inherently demands a response.
Right. When God grants access to himself, whether through a moment of profound clarity and answered prayer or physical miracles, he expects a structural change in the observer. Repentance, transformation, and obedience are the required responses to divine revelation.
Neutrality is an illusion.
Okay, so this creates an enormous tension for the listener. We've established that human preference tries to control God, and that ignoring God's revelation leads to judgment. So action and response are definitely required.
Right.
But the text presents what looks like a glaring, irreconcilable contradiction regarding how we are supposed to respond.
The famous paradox of Matthew 11.
Yeah. Here's where it gets really interesting. The author highlights two verses in this same chapter that seem to be, well, fighting each other. First, you have Matthew 11:12, where Christ says, "The kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force."
Right.
The author emphasizes that entering the kingdom requires earnestness, vigor, and decisive action. Force.
An aggressive, active posture. A total mobilization of energy.
But then you literally turn the page and you hit the famous invitation in verses 28 through 30. "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you."
It's a huge shift in tone.
How can entering the kingdom demand violence and force while the ultimate promise is rest and an easy yoke?
Uh-huh.
Let me toss out an analogy to see if we can map this contradiction.
I love to hear it.
Imagine being caught in a powerful riptide in the ocean. The current pulling you out to sea is your own ego, your own desperate need for control.
I see where you're going with this. The force described in the text isn't about fighting the ocean itself or fighting the rescuer. The author's ultimate thesis resolves the paradox by explaining the direction of the violence. The force required in Matthew 11:12 is not aggression directed toward God.
Right, we aren't staging a coup to get into the kingdom.
No, it is a holy violence directed strictly inward. It is the deliberate, often agonizing alignment of our stubborn will to God's will. Think about your riptide analogy.
Yeah.
The force is the sheer mental and spiritual exertion required to stop swimming against the divine current, to stop fighting the rescuer, and to let go of your own strategy for survival.
It's the energy required to conquer our own resistance.
Exactly. The Matthew Henry commentary points out that self must be denied, the mind renewed, and the will submitted. Human nature does not passively drift into submission.
Never. We want to be the CEO of the project.
Yes, we want to be the children dictating the rules of the game in the marketplace. So the force required is the profound spiritual resolve it takes to silence that inner voice that accuses God when expectations crash.
You are wrestling the soul into rest. That phrase from the text is such a brilliant distillation of the concept.
It really is.
It implies that rest is not a passive state you fall into, but an active state you must fight your own nature to achieve.
And once that internal resistance is conquered, once you exert the force to surrender your autonomy, you encounter the reality of Matthew 11:28.
The easy yoke.
Right? The yoke of Christ, which represents his authority and his appointments for your life, ceases to feel oppressive. The text beautifully states that his yoke is lined with mercy and his burden with grace. The exhaustion you previously felt wasn't from the circumstances themselves. It was from the exhausting business of trying to run the universe.
Wow. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? This deep dive into the narrative study reveals a super counterintuitive truth about human peace.
It flips everything upside down.
It does. True rest is not found in that imaginary future moment when God finally decides to align with your expectations. True rest is found in the exact moment you decide to forcefully align your expectations with God.
Which raises an important question for all of us about where we actually spend our spiritual energy. Rest isn't the absence of difficult circumstances. It is the absence of striving against God within those circumstances.
Which leaves us with a profound closing image from the author to really cement this concept. The text points us away from John the Baptist and the marketplace and looks ahead to Christ in Gethsemane.
The ultimate test of submission.
Yes. Facing the ultimate agonizing circumstance, facing the cross, Christ modeled the very forceful faith he called for in Matthew 11.
The text notes that in Gethsemane, Christ did not wrestle against the Father's plan. He wrestled against the human will that naturally recoiled from the cup of suffering.
He used holy force to yield.
Exactly, to align, to obey. He pressed toward the divine will, not away from it, even in total darkness.
So what does this mean for you the next time you face a shattered expectation, the next time you lose the job, or the relationship cracks, or the medical report makes your stomach drop?
It's going to happen to all of us.
It is. Think about the sheer, overwhelming exhaustion you feel in those moments. What if that exhaustion isn't actually coming from the difficult circumstances themselves?
What if the real drain on your soul is the immense internal energy you are spending trying to dictate exactly how those circumstances must be resolved?
The quiet accusation and the resistance are what deplete us.
They absolutely do.
If the riptide is your own need for control, fighting your own ego is the only way to the shore. So what would happen if, in the middle of your deepest disappointment, you applied that forceful faith, not to demand a different outcome, but to stop fighting the process and simply let go?